번째 모시고자 하는 연사분을 소개해 드리겠습니다. 현재 영국 서섹스 대학교의 총장님이시면서 의과대학 교수입니다. 그리고 코오프, 즉 영국에서 본부를 두고 있는 출판윤리협회의 초대 회장을 지내셨고, UK 리오라고 하는 영국 연구 진실성 위원회 부회장님을 맡고 계십니다. 연구윤리 제도, 연구윤리 교육에 대해 세계적인 명성을 떨치고 계시는 마이클 파싱 교수님을 소개해 드립니다. Could you please start your presentation? 뜨거운 박수로 맞이해 주시기 바랍니다.
Thank you very much indeed for that kind introduction, and thank you all of the organisers for two things. One is for your hospitality and for your kindness, and secondly for having the courage to organise this international meeting to bring together scholars from around the world to discuss what I think for all of us continues to be a major challenge. I don't know any country in this world today who has solved the issues and has faced all of the challenges that I think remain in this area of research integrity and research ethics. It's something that we will all need to continue to work together on, because I don't believe it's restricted by national boundaries. The mobility of researchers across this world will only increase, and that will add to the complexity of the challenges that face us in the future. I should say at the beginning that I came to research integrity as an editor of a specialist biomedical journal back in the mid-1990s. And I was shocked during the first 6 months of my editorship to find people who I knew, names who I knew across the world, behaving badly. And it was for this reason that I joined with some other editors in the UK to form the Committee on Publication Ethics, which I have to say over the last 15 or so years has gone from strength to strength. So I'm going to give, I would say, an overview talk. I'm going to talk a little bit about our current approaches to promote the responsible conduct of research, and I know this is going to be picked up by others during the meeting. I'm going to ask the question, how are we doing? Are they working well? And I think there are two answers to that question, yes and no. I'm also going to raise the question that we focus strongly on researchers and their research integrity, but I'm going to show you that it isn't just researchers and authors that have problems. I'm going to raise, I think, some optimistic but nevertheless challenging opportunities of how we might do better in the future, and bring it together with some remaining global challenges which I think we can only tackle jointly. What about guidance? Already we've heard the word guidance mentioned on a number of occasions this morning. There is a lot of guidance out there. Most of it, or much of it, is very high quality, and increasingly guidance documents are saying very similar things. The first guidance that I was involved in was when I was chairman of COPE. COPE has excellent guidance. It's on the website, easily available, very high quality, very good for prospective authors, journal editors, publishers, the whole publishing consortium. The UK Research Integrity Office has published a code of practice. It's published a procedure for the investigation of research misconduct, which brings together and aligns many of the previous guidance documents in the UK. And I think in the UK, we're pretty much agreed on how we should proceed. But there are endless other. It's a European document. There's a new Concordat from the UK. The MRC have got endless documents, the Medical Research Council, and perhaps within the last couple of years, we've seen an extremely helpful document come out of, as a Canadian report on research integrity. We are not short of guidance. You can now get it in Kindle form, and this is an excellent publication by Tony Mayer and Nick Stenek. There is policy documents from the Inter-Academy Council, and the ORI continue to publish high-quality material. Many universities in the UK over the last 5 or 8 years are publishing their own short versions. This is the University of Sheffield. Very interesting, this publication appeared the year following they had a major difficulty in that university with research integrity. Oxford has got a similar document. So the idea that people don't know about the standards, the guidance that's expected of researchers, I think is now history. The guidance is there, and we've even got interactive programs. I think this is, I recommend any of you to go onto the ORI site and look through this, probably many of you have, where you can actually role play online as to what it feels like to be a postdoc, to be a third-year graduate student or a principal investigator within a challenging environment. So I think it's clear now that all research organizations, whether they're universities, research institutes, or within the business and corporate sector, must issue their guidance on the responsible conduct of research and give guidance about what is research misconduct and how it would be dealt with should an individual fall from those standards. In my institution now, we expect people to sign up to say that they have read this document, because you can have guidance, but to actually get people to read it and read it so they understand it is another step. So we make them sign up that they've actually read it, and I think many institutions do that now. We also have a responsibility to provide training for both researchers and their supervisors. And on many occasions we've seen, particularly during the last 10 or 15 years, it actually is often not the junior researcher, the inexperienced researcher, that is responsible for the misdemeanor. It's often their supervisors who've fallen short. And at the end of the day, an institution, I think, has to provide assurance that there is compliance with these guidance documents. And that is where the difficulty begins. It is very difficult for me, as president, head of a university, to be absolutely certain that there is compliance with the guidance that we give. In 2012, the UK published a Concordat, and it was a joint publication between Universities UK, the organisation that oversees all universities or represents all universities, and the research councils. And there were 5 important commitments, and none of them, I think, will surprise you, perhaps except the last. To underpin all of their work with common values of rigour and integrity, conforms to all legal and professional obligations incumbent on their work, to nurture a research environment that supports research of the highest standards of rigour and integrity, to use transparent, robust and fair processes to handle allegations of misconduct, and to continue to monitor and, where necessary, improve the suitability and appropriateness of the mechanisms in place to provide assurances over the integrity of research. And it is this monitoring and the ability to provide assurances that I believe are the most challenging for us as we go forward in the future. And this is my university, and this is my vision for 2018, and this is what it says in our strategic plan. I'm not going to go through the details, but it includes a considerable development of that campus with a refurbishment and a rebuilding of much of our science campus. Here is our social science, and our arts and humanities are up here. And the question I ask myself as head of that institution is, can I assure, can I be certain that all of the research undertaken in that university are not only of high quality, and that's something we can measure and do measure, but is it always also of the highest integrity? And I think that is where we have difficulties, because we do not have easy measures of integrity without, I think, becoming more obtrusive as university managers, and I'll come back to that. So my second point is, how well are we doing? I don't think we're doing that well. And here we have a picture, a graph, which I think many of you will recognize. The green bars show the rise in publication during the period 1977 to 2011, and the blue line represents the number of retracted papers. And if we were doing well, the retraction should remain roughly consistent, a consistent proportion of the number of papers published. Ideally, the number of retractions should be falling because of the responsible conduct of research initiatives that are now going on worldwide. But the opposite is true. The number of retractions are outstripping the number, or the proportion of retractions are outstripping the number of publications. Now, this could be, of course, raised awareness, and I think we are more aware, and I think websites like Retraction Watch have done much to publicize retractions in a way in which perhaps we were not also aware. And of course, in the pre-digital age, even though you had retracted a paper, as I did in the 1990s, I retracted a paper, the first one within a year of becoming an editor, that journal volume still sits on library shelves without any notion that that paper is retracted. It is read as if it's a true scientific paper by the susceptible reader. So I don't think we're doing so well, and certainly there is no room for complacency. I've got competition. Can you get me back into my slide presentation, please? Oh, maybe okay, great, fantastic. I don't know what happened there. And the question that people often ask about retractions is, well, were they just errors? And I think what you can see here is that 46% of the retractions were deemed to be due to plagiarism, 43% to other sorts of research misconduct, and only a minority were actually due to errors. And of course, many of you will know that the journals often with the highest impacts are the journals that are retracting most papers. This isn't a phenomenon that's seen in the lesser journals. And one of the reasons I think why we are not doing as well as I think we should is the fact that we're now seeing what one might call the high rollers of research misconduct, with very, very large numbers of retractions. And this is the anesthesiologist Bolt. This is the social psychologist, Diederik Stapel, 55 papers retracted. 10 PhD dissertations contained questionable data because he'd fed false data to his students. And the explanation was that he was in a quest for aesthetics, for beauty, instead of truth. And so I think we need to do a lot more in trying to understand the motives of these individuals who really commit research misconduct on a grand scale. And probably the record holder at the moment is somebody with at least 172 retractions, and possibly it's now risen to over 180 retractions, again, in the field of anesthesiology in Japan. So how come we can have a system that allows people to create misdemeanors of this scale over periods of 10, 15, or 20 years? How come we don't have any checks and balances in the system to adequately stop that. And I'm going to come up with some suggestions a little later on. I mentioned that it's not just researchers. I think some journal editors don't do their job very well. Some of the criteria for selection of both reviewers and subsequently papers, I think, can be questioned. It's sometimes said that if you want to publish a paper as an editor, you know how to select the reviewers who will give you the answer you want. I think editors are still reluctant to publish negative data, which brings bias into the published material. I think there are still questionable relationships with the industry. I think sometimes decisions are still made for financial reasons. Publish a paper that's going to attract a lot of reprints. That's a very substantial increase to journal income in a financial year. And of course, the relationship between journals and their advertisers is also very important financially. Manipulation of impact factors, I'll come back to that again in a moment, but all I would say is it's still going on. And some journal editors won't implement the guidance that is there. Consort is an extremely strong framework for which we should be publishing clinical trials. It still doesn't always happen. And this was a particular example. Schoen, I think, is a name that will be known to most of you. He worked in Bell Labs. He published many papers in Nature and Science. And the Wall Street Journal said that these journals were locked in such fierce competition for prestige and publicity that they may be cutting corners to get hot papers. And Robert Laughlin agreed with that. In this case, the editors are definitely culpable. They chose reviewers they knew would be possible. And even one of the editors of Nature, given the exciting nature of the claims made by the papers, he was certainly hoping that the outcome would be positive. This doesn't feel a very challenging or serious environment in which to review new science. This is an old paper now, nearly 15 years old, that shows the relationship between self-citing in journals and impact factor. So editors in the past have driven or tried to drive up their impact factors by encouraging prospective authors to cite papers in their own journal as often as they could. And I found this completely unbelievable. I received a letter from an editor about 3 or 4 weeks ago. I'd been in discussion with one of my own papers, and his tailpiece was, "I hope you will cite some more papers in this journal before we finally accept your paper for publication." 2014. I can't believe that it's still going on, but clearly it is. I think peer review was never set up as a way to seek research misconduct. It was never set up for that reason. But I think editors now do have a duty to screen for plagiarism. I think they have to use appropriate statistical review. Many journals now automatically check for image manipulation, and some are looking at the veracity of data sets to check whether they've been actually generated in a biological system for medicine and life sciences, or whether they've actually been generated on a desk. The industry, I think, continues to fail to register and publish all clinical trials, although there is a really optimistic sign on the horizon. Currently, they are often difficult about releasing the full data set. For instance, we still don't know the true answer about whether the antiviral drug Tamiflu is effective or not. There is still selectivity in data reporting. Show the data about a new drug that shows it works. Don't show the data that shows that it actually doesn't make any clinical difference to the patient. And there's still a reluctance, once a drug has been released and licensed, to disclose the cumulative adverse effects. People are always rather late in the day in withdrawing a drug for those reasons. But just this week in the British Medical Journal, big strides in Europe towards clinical trial transparency. By January of next year, all trials will need to be registered. before they get ethics approval. There will need to be able to get public access to the core content of all these reports. The contents will be downloadable and it will be subject to further analysis if people desire. There will be access to individual anonymized patient data, although sponsors can redact commercially sensitive data, and that'll be a challenge. What is commercially sensitive? Drug structure may fall into that category, but we'll have to see whether there are loopholes that begin to emerge. But I think we are moving towards a situation, certainly in Europe, where all clinical trials will be published in full and their data, full data set will be available for independent analysis. So I think what I'm coming to think is that on either side of this river, there's on one hand the responsible conduct of research, and on the other side there's research misconduct. And I think there is water between the two, and the question is, what can we do to bridge the gap? I think we continue to need to promote the responsible conduct of research, but at the same time, we need to make sure there are some deterrents that enable us to help discourage and also to detect misconduct. And that will have a positive effect. It means that we'll have less misconduct, I believe, to deal with. At the same time, we've got to understand that people make mistakes. People do make genuine mistakes, and we've got to be willing to recognize this, to support and rehabilitate those researchers who hold their hand up and say, I made a mistake, and don't try and defend themselves until they get onto the steps of the court. And finally, we've got to be clearer about what sanctions are reasonable to apply to researchers who have committed misconduct. At the moment, there's a broad spectrum of the sorts of punishments that can occur to researchers, and it differs from country to country, it differs from university to university, even within a country. So what are our current and future challenges? To promote the responsible conduct of research, I think increasingly it's not only about registering clinical trials. I wonder sometimes whether we ought to register all significant research. Just think, Bolt, Fuji, Starpool, if they'd registered those research projects, how could they ever have gone on for 5, 10, 15, 20 years creating research on the desk if they'd had to register those projects with a regulator? They wouldn't, because they couldn't suddenly send a paper into a journal and say, we've just done this research. They would have had to have registered it, and they would probably also should have registered how that study was funded. And that might be the beginning of a way in which we can keep a better grip on funded, planned, protocol-driven research before it ever comes near a journal. I'm going to say a bit more about the monitoring of research and the audit of research, because I think it's only through monitoring and audit, explicit and transparent monitoring and audit, that we will ultimately be able to provide assurance, not just about research quality, but about research integrity. And we need to develop better mechanisms to identify research. And one of the things that's always puzzled me is that in my university, I have financial audit every year, internal and external financial audit. Every 5 years, I have audit of my teaching quality by the Quality Assurance Agency, but nobody comes to ask me whether my research is performed with integrity. And this just gives you, this graph just shows you the proportion of turnover of UK research-intensive universities, so the top 40 universities in the country, and you can see it can be up to 54% of the turnover of a university. So 54% of the activity of a university in terms of funding is not audited in any way at all. So, you know, it's a big business. I would say that research supervision, despite training, is still variable. I think a lot of research in university is not monitored and only selectively audited. I mean, certainly clinical trials are audited, particularly when they're externally driven, sponsor-driven by industry. but a lot of research is not audited at all. We certainly assess quality. We have a research excellence framework which occurs every 5 years. So I know exactly the quality of the research in, say, physics in my university, and I can compare it with physics research in all other British universities. But I can't assess and assure its integrity. We've seen a number of universities that are, I think, responding to this wake-up call. I think Duke University in the US had a bit of a shock, and their vice dean for basic sciences within the School of Medicine. Among the changes will be a revised IT system for research data to ensure the data that is originally entered in a study is the same data used in the end analysis and to document whenever data is altered. This sounds like enhanced monitoring. This sounds like audit to me. We had a problem in one of our Welsh universities, and the Dean of Medicine there was accused of allowing image manipulation in several studies. The Dean, as you can see, was exonerated. But the recommendations were that the university should establish and promote standards for the publication of images of gels and blots. You would have thought they might have that already. And that they should make original image files that in future should be viewed and assessed prior to submission for publication. I would say that was pretty basic supervision personally. The action is enhanced monitoring and possibly ultimately formal audit. Just this week, in our magazine, Times Higher Education, you see there is a camera on the front page, "We're watching you." And this is a long article about, it's called Mass Observation, and you can see there's the British countryside here with cameras, speed cameras, looking down, watching what academics are doing. And it talks about a lot of aspects of academic activity and how this is now currently being monitored, and there is some despair that we've sunk to this level. Monitoring research integrity is not mentioned at all in that article. A missed opportunity, I would say. But the Irish are beginning to do research audit. Mark Ferguson, who's a very senior life scientist, originally from the University of Manchester, he says he doesn't want to be cast as the role of Big Brother. I want this to be constructive, polite, and educative. But nevertheless, auditors will go into all Irish universities and examine small samples of lab books, etc., to check the veracity of results. It's interesting as to why he should have taken this step. He himself had some trouble in the 1980s when he submitted two journals, a paper to two journals at the same time, one of which just happened to be Science, and the story went viral. So discouraging research misconduct, some examples of what might be in the toolbox: registration of clinical trials. I think we're just about getting there, but I would suggest we might consider whether we need to register other significant research studies. Deposition and linkage of data, plagiarism detection software, currently frequently used, and I believe doing a job to reduce plagiarism, helping. Image manipulation software, and a further emphasis on the forensic analysis of quantitative data sets. We have to create at the same time a culture where whistleblowers can say when they're concerned. They can speak up and feel safe and not suffer and become the culprit. We need to collect and collate information. That's one of the things that we are not doing well at the moment in the UK, because we need to understand what is happening to misconduct in particular across our nation. There should be free information exchange, and I think this is now limited at the moment, even between universities. And we need to be clear about our sanctions. So in conclusion, we need an enhanced version of promoting the responsible conduct of research, registration, I believe closer monitoring by research supervisors, and enhanced audit. And I think research institutions like universities are going to have to take this on. I would say we need not only registration of research, but possibly registration of researchers. And we should perhaps be willing to offer or issue research passports showing that researchers are compliant and are following, we can assure that they are following all of the guidance. And we need to support those that are expressing concerns. I'm thinking very seriously about getting all new researchers, when they come to the university, to disclose on appointment whether they've had previous or pending allegations of research misconduct. I want there to be more legitimate global information sharing between institutions, because currently researchers can move from one university or one research institute to another without it being clear that they've had problems. We need to make it permissible to admit a mistake and at the same time know that that's not necessarily the end of your career, that you can be supported and rehabilitated and re-enter the profession as a researcher. But at the same time, we do need to think why research fraud is so different from financial fraud. The latter being one that in most jurisdictions attracts a custodial sentence, and why research fraud is often dismissed as being a minor misdemeanor, because there is no, or so it is said, there is no person who actually suffers. And we need to understand why people do these things, why Starple thought he was performing aesthetics rather than good, high-quality research. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike.